In this episode of the Exploring Information Security Podcast, what is the problem ArcJet is trying to solve?
Computers now have primary control of critical functions.
Houston, recommend vector transfer.
Your go for APU shutdown on time.
Roger, go for deploy.
Nice to be in orbit.
Welcome to the Exploring Information Security Podcast, where you will learn, explore, and grow your security mindset. I am your host, Timothy D. Block, and in this episode, we will be exploring what problem ArcJet is solving. With me to do that is David Mytton, the founder and CEO of ArcJet. Show notes can be found at exploresec.com/EIS. Feedback for the show, timothy.dblock@exploresec.com. You can hit me up on LinkedIn or at the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. And that's all I have for intros for the podcast. So events coming up. ShowMeCon has early bird pricing going on right now, so I would definitely recommend going and checking that out. You will get a dose of ShowMeCon episodes early next year. They're going to be sponsoring the podcast for I think like 10, 11, 12 episodes. We'll get to dive into some of the topics that you can expect at ShowMeCon this year. Again, I highly recommend it. It's one of my favorite conferences. It's in early June, so you can check it out at showmecon.com. This episode with ArcJet is a little bit. I've started getting hit up by vendors that want to come on the show. I don't always bring on vendors because I kind of want to vet them. I look them up. This seemed like a really interesting conversation with David around ArcJet. He's a developer that has decided to make a company and a product that pretty much adds security into an application directly. So I think this is good because it lowers the bar for developers. I also think that if you're doing things from a development perspective, you already have security embedded. That's kind of along the same lines here. So really great getting to talk to him about this. And ArcJet is kind of one of those ones that's just starting out. So I'm really excited to see how well they do going forward. But this podcast is kind of the start of a new series. As part of the vendors, what I really want to do is kind of ask them, what's the problem being solved, get into the conversations. It'll be the same format as usual, but because I am starting to get hit up by vendors that want to come on, and I've got a couple more that will be released next year that I wanted to have a kind of like a format for that. So definitely would love some feedback on that. Speaking of next year, this will be the last one I think I'm going to release for this year with an actual interview. The holidays I release on Tuesdays, so the holidays land on both those days. Not really great for anyone that's come on as far as like getting out there because everyone's traveling, everybody's off. I always like continuing to release content through the holidays, so there will be releases, but I'm going to do, I think definitely for Christmas, I'm going to do a re-release like I've started doing this year, which I think is great to get some of the older content out there, kind of get it refreshed. When I stopped doing the podcast, Apple was just finally starting to come out with some metrics for the shows. So there's a lot of episodes that just have 0 for everything. So I'm going to re-release, see what kind of the engagement is on those. And again, this is why I did the podcast, is I can re-release stuff because it's timeless content instead of timely. So a lot of the same ideas and concepts are still there. And I want to kind of bring some of those back around just because I think they're really interesting, and there's really good conversations with people, and a lot of the concepts, some of the stuff might be dated, but the concept should still be the same. So I will be doing that. And then I think for New Year's, I'm going to do maybe a state of the podcast. We'll kind of see how it is. I'll have a little bit of free time, so I might record something that kind of talks about the podcast, what I've learned over the last year, kind of statistics, things like that. So again, another kind of easy. So I haven't done really a solo episode this year, which I was doing some of those, but that's kind of the idea. But with that, let's go ahead and get right into it with David. So I've been like trying to research this morning, and I've listened to a podcast a couple months ago or a month ago when we set this up. And then I just watched a video of you doing an interview for ArcJet. And I figure that's what you want to come on to talk about. And I have the website pulled up, and I don't know if it's just because I'm dumb or if it's just like I feel like you had like a good conversation. It sounds like a really cool. That's why I'm having you on. Get hit up by vendors all the time that are like, "Can you come on the podcast?" I was like, I have no. This doesn't look like anything, but this looks very interesting. And you're coming from a development background, right?
That's right.
So,
yeah.
and I don't want to put you off here, but like I can't figure out exactly what you do, right? Because I pulled up the website and you guys are doing bot detection, rate limiting, email validation, attack protection. Data redaction. Data redaction is very interesting, and that's what I feel like you guys talked about in one of the other interviews before. But like, just kind of explain, I guess, from your own perspective, what ArcJet is. And you're the founder of it, of course. But like, what is ArcJet? And like, what is it?
So it's a security as code product, which means it allows developers to build in protections like bot detection, a WAF, which is what we call the attack detection, rate limiting, email validation. They can build them in as code directly into their application. So I'm sure you're familiar with all sorts of different security tools. Often these exist on the network. So they analyze every request that comes in. It's like a firewall. And that's really good for things like volumetric DDoS attacks. But most attacks don't look like that. It's much more difficult to understand what is actually going on and distinguish it from just a generic attack from something that's application specific. And your application has no idea what's going on. So if a request is blocked to the firewall, your app doesn't know. And if a request is allowed through it, it doesn't know why. And so you can't change the logic of your application based on knowing who's logged in, the pricing plan they're on, using IP analysis to change the like logging someone in straight away versus showing them a two-factor authentication because their request is suspicious. So really, it's all about bringing developers into the security workflow and meeting them where they are most comfortable, which is in code.
So is that so does that mean the application itself is kind of like self-contained, these tools? Because you did talk about, it usually being on the network, and to me, we like to use in security bolting on, but this seems like it's almost making the application its own kind of defense mechanism. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, it's adding another layer in there. Nothing is obviously 100% secure, so you need multiple layers, and having that network firewall is just one layer. But DDoS protection is provided by every cloud provider these days. It's commodity. It's out of the box. You don't even have to think about it. It's where you need to have the application-specific context that things get a bit more complicated. And so that's what we're helping developers build in using code so they can run it on the laptop, they can test it out, you can write integration tests against your security rules. And it's the same when you deploy it to staging as when you deploy it to production.
So is this just a framework then, or like what is ArcJet itself? Like what, as far as like installing it or getting it into the application, what does that look like?
It's an SDK, so it's a library that you install as part of the dependencies in your application, and then you just import it into your route handlers or middleware, and it integrates with whatever framework you're using. So that could be Next.js, Node.js, Remix. Currently, it's all JavaScript that we're supporting, but the plan is to go out to different tech stacks like PHP and Laravel, Django and Python over the coming months.
So wait, so you have to build support for all those different frameworks then? Gotcha. Yep. Okay, so it's not. So you have like a certain, I guess, set of frameworks or, what do you call them? Code bases, right?
That's right. Yeah, yeah. We just support JavaScript right now on the JavaScript ecosystem because it's the most popular web, the web language, I suppose. But we want to go out to other ones like PHP is huge. So is Python, particularly in business applications. JavaScript gets a lot of the noise. Mm-hmm. But there are there's way more applications written in other languages. Yeah,
when I was working in application security, that was one of my jokes. Is like there's a new JavaScript framework like almost every week, right? So this will handle all those, any sort of JavaScript, anything new that pops out, it'll handle all that kind of stuff or work with that. Yeah, that's awesome. Cool. So you talked about too, like devs having a different, I guess. Reason for doing things. Security has its reasons, right? Why would devs really care about this?
Well, that's the line, right? Devs don't care about security.
Right.
And the reason why they get that reputation, I think, is not because they don't care. It's just because the incentives are different. And if you think through what developers are supposed to do, that they're there to build features for customers, and they're there to fix bugs in the application. And so their interaction with security, it might be on the list of things they would like to get to, but they generally only ever happens in two different situations. One is where the security team has asked them because there's a vulnerability or a problem, and then they're forced to deal with it, installing a software product or patching something, updating a dependency. So there's that adversarial relationship, which is there. And then the second one is when the product team asks them to do something because a customer wants, you want a checklist item on a compliance framework, or you need to build out a particular thing for a customer request, like single sign-on or something like that. And so the challenge for developers is they only really get involved, or at least they only get time allocated when they're forced to by another team. And so it makes it seem like developers don't care when really they're just being asked to do different things.
Yeah, and I'm from the perspective, like I've worked with development teams building out security programs, and I absolutely agree with you. And often I feel like it's often security's fault for coming in and just chucking stuff over the wall without actually understanding what's actually happening within their ecosystem, within their world. And that's been something I'm hoping the security picks up. I was like, we're trying to be enablers, right? So what I did was I just first 3 months just sat in there and tried to understand the different nuances, because I can come in and I can make it secure, but that could potentially piss off a lot of people. So that's why I really like ArcJet too, right? Is because it's built in, and that's what a lot of its interesting security SaaS tools have been trying to do, is get into the IDEs to, like, as they're writing code, give them feedback. So I think, but I just love the idea of the fact that it's like self-contained within the application, so the application can fight back instead of having to. And to me, like, a WAF can sometimes be pointless, and because often you have to, the application has to communicate. That's kind of how it does it. And there's going to always be ways around that. But for devs that want to get into it, like, what's the bar for entry on this stuff?
It's literally just npm install ArcJet, and then you drop in a couple of lines of code, and then you're done, at least to get something going. That gets our WAF set up. You can get some basic rate limits going. You can block bots. It's kind of 4 or 5 lines of code. And typically developers will come trying to solve a problem rather than thinking about it from a security product perspective. So they'll think, I'm getting loads of sign-up spam. People are trying to sign up and spam my website, or they're using fraudulent credit cards, or they're abusing the API. And security people will think about that in that, well, I need to buy bot detection, I need to build rate limiting, I need to set up email verification, whereas developers are thinking about it as a problem. And so we try to solve the problem with just a few lines of code, but that's not where it ends, right? This is the quick way to get going, but a lot of dev tools fall down when you have more complicated requirements. And because we're integrating it as an SDK, as a library, you get access to all of the metadata behind it. You can configure all the rules. So you can fix your problem now, you can move on to something else, but then as your use case becomes more sophisticated, you can come back and you can change the configuration, you can get deeper into what's going on, and hopefully ArcJet will then grow with you as your problem maybe gets bigger, but it probably gets more sophisticated and more challenging to deal with.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I'm thinking of like flaws, right? Like a retail company where it's not an actual vulnerability, but people are able to check out like a coupon at like at a 200% discount versus like a 5% discount, right? So that's right. A flaw, and that's also really I love what you just said there too. Is like security come in and it's like, oh yeah, we just got to throw this in place. It's like that's not going to get necessarily caught by the bot detection or in the security tooling. So I do like that. You're offering essentially developers too, right? Is we want them. They like code. If I give them like a GUI, they're gonna tell me to go away.
Right. Yeah, that's a kind of ClickOps approach. And often, like, you're deploying some kind of security solution in production, and you click a few buttons and it's on for 100% of your traffic. And usually that results in things breaking because you couldn't test it locally, or you couldn't test it in staging. And so the idea here is just to bring developers in as soon as possible, help them solve the problem with full knowledge of their application and what should be configured where, and being able to actually write tests against it.
So do you think this lives more with like each individual developer, or do you feel like this lives with like a DevOps team or a platform engineering team, or, some sort of, the developers focus on infrastructure type stuff?
We're still exploring that question. So we know who the user is, which is the developer, because they're interacting with the SDK. And then the question is, well, who brings this in? Maybe in a smaller team, it's the developers, particularly where there is no security person or security team, and the developers just have to deal with things. And often that means that they're being taken away from what you might call value-added development, like actually building features for customers or solving bugs. They're having to come in because someone's attacking their site in some way, like you said, spamming voucher codes in thousands of times a minute or something like that. I think what we've seen with DevOps is what tried to happen with DevSecOps, where with DevOps, developers took more responsibility of the infrastructure. And then at larger companies, we had this idea of an SRE, the site reliability engineering team, who would build tools for the developers to deploy faster and with guardrails. And the idea of DevSecOps, I think, was very similar to that, but it never really managed to hit the full potential, I feel. Developers still don't have enough responsibility for security. There's still an entirely separate security team, and I think it's just because the mindset is very different. Like developers build, and security tries to break or reduce risk, and those are they're kind of almost opposites. And so I think there's room for DevOps teams or platform engineering teams or the security team to come and bring ArcJet in for their developers, and maybe have some organization-wide controls, but really it's just the developers implementing it.
Yeah, I have a whole rant about the term DevSecOps. I hate it because at one point we had like DevOps, DevOpsSec, like everyone had their own, and everyone had their own. I was at a company where we had a meeting called DevSecOps, and it was pretty much it was the security and infrastructure team. And I'm talking like not even developer infrastructure, like infrastructure doing servers and stuff. And I was like, that's not what that means. But right. I hate it because I also think security comes in and tries to insert stuff into, development. And it's like, no, if you do, like everything's in the documentation already, right? If you're coding like you're supposed to, you're not going to introduce vulnerabilities. Is when people, developers go to Stack Overflow and find the setting for their problem to turn off security. Oh, it works fine. It's like, that's the problem. And so I think the same thing with DevOps. If you're doing DevOps properly, like security's already built into a lot of that stuff. So that's a bit of a side rant there. But
no, I agree. DevOps was about enabling developers to deploy faster. And for security, for DevSecOps, it should have been about enabling developers to build safer, but it just never happened. It was always about slowing developers down or forcing them to use horrible tools or all that. It just the incentives just didn't work, unfortunately, even though the philosophy and the intention was good.
Yeah, I mean, and that was my whole point too, was DevOps was it's like you want something patched, like they're going to do it now instead of wait for the next window that they have to do it. That's the whole point. I was like, we're going to make things more secure if you just let them do their DevOps stuff. Right. But security people, they tend to freak out about, oh no, I got to see what this, I got to understand it. And it's like, it's really not that hard. Like and we can build in stuff. And honestly too, as I did a lot of testing on applications and work with developers directly on it. And they started figuring out what I was going to find. And they started addressing that stuff very early on in the code. So we could talk about the whole shift left thing, but
that's another buzzword, right? The best way to fix a security issue is before it's even committed. Mm-hmm. And that's where the tooling, there's lots of really interesting tooling in the editor really helps that. But there are problems that only arise in production, like rate limiting related things. You don't have that locally. Bots don't attack your application locally. And so you have to separate these two different groups of secure code as you're writing it, but then secure deployments once your application is live.
So that's a good question. Do you have this throughout the entire, like if you have production QA, pre-pro, whatever, like do you put it in all of it or do you just put it in production?
You run it everywhere. So you install it locally, you can run it locally, you can write integration tests against it as part of your normal application test suite. And this is one of the challenges of production-only security is if you want to test it, then you're attacking production or you're sending traffic to production. And maybe the vendor that you're using, the firewall vendor, decides, well, that's actually an attack and they block you. And that causes all sorts of problems. So you need to be able to test your security locally, just like you write tests against anything else. And so ArcJet can run locally. It will run in staging. It will run in production. It runs exactly the same wherever it's deployed, wherever it's running.
Have you guys done any sort of testing against security tooling, like a DAST or anything else, or even just like pen testers or anything, and seen how well you guys come out?
Yeah, well, so the attack detection component, which we call Shield, which is basically a WAF, we run tests against that, against the OWASP rules, the core rule set. So we apply that and we run their unit tests against our rules to make sure that we're always catching things. And then the bot detection, we have, on the SDK, we have 100% test coverage. It's an open source SDK, so you can go and have a look at the tests that we run. The goal is never to break the API for the developers. But there's always novel, interesting security flaws coming out, and I pay a lot of attention to the WAF kind of breakthrough type attacks, the 0 days on other WAF products, and see if we're also affected.
Does it do anything for misconfigurations? Because the APIs, right, nowadays, it's not really, I mean, there's SQL injection, but like cross-site scripting, not much of an issue. A lot of the traditional attacks on a traditional application aren't much of an issue, but APIs is more, to me, about misconfiguration. Looking at the OWASP API top 10, it's like 8 out of the 10 are misconfiguration. Do you guys have a use case for any of that?
So we'll analyze the request that comes through the WAF rules and look for things like you said, SQL injection, cross-site scripting. But yeah, they're less of an issue just because of certainly JavaScript frameworks have a lot of security by default. It's just built in. You have to do some very specific things to disable that, like setting HTML. The prop's called dangerously set inner HTML, and so it's pretty obvious when you're doing something dangerous. In terms of configuration of your own system, that's something we want to do in the future. We have a huge opportunity once the SDK is installed in your application, because then we can see the entire architecture of what you've built. And today that just means we don't bother configuring rules that detect PHP vulnerabilities when we know that you're running a JavaScript application. There's no point. But we want to get a lot smarter about how we do that and look at, say, well, which authorization and authentication libraries are you using? How have you configured those? What should the requests look like versus what are we seeing coming through the system? And that's where we can be a lot more specific to your application than a traditional WAF or network level tool.
Gotcha. Okay. How have you seen security people interacting with ArcJet?
So the common response from security people is, I really don't want another tool. I've got so many tools, so many alerts. But when we explain, well, this is for your development team, you can have oversight. And because it's just in code, you can pipe all of the logging through whatever logging system you're already using. It just that is there by default. You don't have to configure it. And so for security teams, it's, well, I would love to give something to my developers that they're actually going to like. And that's the feedback that we've got from security so far. We've been focused on developers adopting it, but over the next 12 to 18 months, it's more going to be the security teams where they're making that first hire into an early stage company, first security hire, and then perhaps a little bit later on when there's a few people in a team. And our goal there is that we can take off kind of 4 or 5 different things from that massive list that the first security hire has coming into a company, and they can focus elsewhere. And that means things like organization-wide rules, compliance, being able to see where all of the applications are deployed, because devs never deploy to a single place or on a single platform, and just having that visibility across everywhere that your systems are without having platform-specific configuration and dashboards and alerting systems that you need to deal with.
Yeah, that's gonna be my next question was if you're interacting more with devs or security folks, and I think you kind of answer that too. But to the alerting and reporting, that's also my next question is like what kind of alerting and reporting do you have out of ArcJet?
So at the moment, there is kind of general analytics. So you can see the requests that we're processing, whether we're allowing or denying the requests, the reasons for those, and the top sources of traffic. And the plan is for that is to get a lot more granular, so you can go in. But like I said, it's all just code. So you can see the decision back into your application, then you can just log it. And that can go into your application logs, or you can pipe it into your SIM or whatever system you're using. We don't generate any alerts ourselves. I think there's enough alerts probably from everyone, but at some point we'll have some configuration so you can get some basic details on what's going on, or pipe everything into a SIM directly. And I think that's where we can add a lot of interesting value in the forensic sides of things. For me, it's all about, on the security side of things, it's all about the question of what happened, because ideally you'll block attacks, but there's always going to be some kind of incident at some point. And in that case, you want to be able to answer the question, what happened, who did it, what happened, what area of my application was affected. And because we can see every single request, we can really help answer that question.
So going back, so I just realized, like, what made you want to like create this tool?
So I sold my first company, which was a cloud monitoring business, in 2018, and then joined the acquirer for 18 months, left at the end of 2019. And then I started a DevTools newsletter called console.dev because I couldn't find anywhere online to tell me what DevTools I should pay attention to as an experienced engineer. And so I was just playing with DevTools all day, every day, and every week, just writing these really short reviews about the tools I thought were worth your time. And then in parallel to that, I started learning security, like doing hacking challenges and bug bounties, and really just getting into the security mindset and learning all about the challenges that that security brings to modern application development. And it was through combining those two interests that I realized, well, there aren't any good security tools for developers once you get into production. Once you get into production, that's the thing. And I was used to the high quality bar of tools like Vercel for deployments, PlanetScale for your database, Tailscale for networking, even VS Code and the integration that GitHub provides with Copilot. Just the whole development workflow is like, the level of quality over the last few years has really increased significantly. But looking at security tools, they're kind of random CLIs that you download off GitHub, and often they're running Python 2, which is out of date and you can't upgrade, and you have to run them in a sandbox, or it's something like Burp Suite, which is amazing, but is like in a weird UI because it's Java and there's lots of quirks around that.
Yeah, so I've had on I don't know, did you mess with OWASP Zap at all?
Yep, it's another one.
So that's that's another one that was built by Simon over at Mozilla. God, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I think it's like Simon Bennett. But he's a developer too. So I love when developers are coming into our space to build stuff, because it's like it should then be more intuitive to developers, which is, you know, a lot of what I was in application security. I don't have a development background. I cannot have that mindset. But what I have a really good job of doing is I could read code at some level, and I could ask questions and try to understand it. And that's what really made me successful. And you guys are like really brilliant at this stuff. And I have found that a lot of developers really want to do a good job, right? And they want to write, the good developers especially, like I said, it's all about that quality and getting that quality there. So I just appreciate that people like you are coming into our industry and making tools that make sense for developers.
Yeah, it's the focus on the user experience, what it looks like, but also the developer experience. Like, how does it integrate with your workflow? And it feels like security is maybe 5 or 10 years behind the state of the art in development. And like we said, and you end up with ClickOps type interfaces with a separate dashboard, separate login that's built for security people, and kind of assumes a lot of knowledge, or doesn't make it easier to just get close to the code. And so I thought, well, I could create something. And so that's what ArcJet became. We started in June last year, 2023, and built it out from there.
So where does the name come from?
Naming a company is so difficult. There's every domain you can think of has been taken. There's trademarks. There's people sitting on the handles on all the social media. And I literally spent several days just going through lists of scientific terms, engineering terms, sci-fi terms, everything I could think of. Just on Wikipedia, there's long lists of all these terms, and went through and found this word ArcJet, which is an experimental electronic engine developed by NASA for space flight propulsion. And all the domains were available. There was no one on the trademarks, and the .com was registered, but I was able to buy it from the owner for 0.1 Bitcoin, and transferred it to me. And it's a cool name. It's a space-related name. I'm really into sci-fi and space tech, and it's short, so it was perfect.
Yeah. When I Google it, I come up, and I'm sure you hear this from Fallout fans.
Yep,
It's in Fallout.
that's right.
Which I've never played. I don't know if you played it, but I imagine there's plenty of people that are like, "Oh, is that a Fallout reference?"
Yeah, it's some company in Fallout, some experimental company or something. So that's our main competition on Google is Fallout, which is fine.
Yeah. Hey, look, yeah, you could probably build some swag or something around that, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, and I like what you said too, is experimental. And I absolutely agree with you. Security is that's why I liked working with developers, is they seem to be more forward thinking about some of the stuff. Like I like cloud security is still something security, and started working on that 7-8 years ago, and it blew my mind. I was like, this is some really cool stuff, because it changed how servers work, right? And it really shifted to more like you're talking about, like automation and building and kind of streamlining stuff. And that's kind of where we're heading anyway. So I think security really should get out of their own way and like try to catch up, right? And it's really just having a conversation and also just trusting, right? I think security and private developers have a trust issue going on. And so like security wants to know everything, and it's like, you guys can't know everything. Like, you really just have to trust your developers that they're going to do the right thing. And honestly, that's what it was. Is at the end of the day, they knew I was going to find it. Like if it went to production or pre-production, and I was testing in pre-production, I was going to find it, because I messed up their stuff before. And then, after that, we had a good relationship.
I think the design, when we talk about design, it's not just what it looks like. And this is something that Apple have been very good at for a very long time. It's not just what it looks like, but it's how it works. And I think those are the two key components for any good software tool or library. And the development workflow has a lot of tooling that has both. There's a CLI that you can use, or there's an API that just works natively and feels native to whichever language you're in. And that's where the security tooling has been lacking for a while. Is it's really utilitarian. It does the job, but it's perhaps complicated to use or doesn't fit into how you're used to things. And I think those are the improvements that just take a lot of time and effort to put in and figure it out.
What's your favorite, and you don't have to name a customer, but unless you want to, I don't know if you have permission to or not. But what's been your favorite customer like success story from this?
The one that comes to mind is it's a website that or a service that makes it easy to index unindexable content that you might have internally in different systems, and puts it available online so your customers can find it. And they were able to use this to reduce their infrastructure costs by 66% because of the number of bots that were just crawling and downloading all the content at high velocity. And so this was a big problem. They just wanted to reduce their infrastructure costs, and ArcJet helped them solve that. Another customer is one we were talking a little bit about earlier with the e-commerce transaction flow, where their application was just getting abused by people adding hundreds of thousands of items into the shopping carts and creating multiple shopping carts. And it was they were able to use ArcJet to apply rate limits and bot detection. Bot detection is not 100%. You'll always get people getting through it. And so you need to have these layers. And so you had the bot detection first, and then you add the rate limiting. And with those two combined, you can usually completely eliminate all these types of attacks. And so those two use cases are really good to see, because we're able to help one customer just reduce their costs, which is a great value to them. And then the other one was able to just remove this annoying overhead on their infrastructure, or these huge shopping carts that they weren't expecting. So they could focus. It was a small team in both cases, so they could focus on other things rather than trying to combat these annoying attacks.
Yeah. And do you have like a particular industry or a particular customer that you're finding as far as like a use case, like you're talking about the bot? Is it mostly bot detection, or are there other reasons companies are coming to you?
Bot detection is the main one that we're seeing at the moment, and there's two use cases that rise out in particular. There's AI and ML related use cases, because there's a direct cost to every single request, because you're paying someone like OpenAI for their API credits, or you're doing inference on GPUs that you're running. And so being able to eliminate those abusive requests, or just apply a quota, strict quota to anonymous users, that makes a big difference on the cost side of things. And then the other one is SaaS applications, new SaaS applications where it might be an indie developer or someone who's just going solo for the first time. They're building a small application, they're bootstrapped, and they want to build in some protections by default. Because inevitably, as soon as the most common thing that I've seen with SaaS applications is people just pushing fraudulent credit cards through and just signing up for loads of accounts just to test the card, not because they want to buy the product or steal the product, but because they want to see if that card works so they can go and use it somewhere else. And that just hits you on the chargebacks, and your card processor or the reputation that you have with them will reduce very, very quickly. And then they can block your account very quickly, which is really painful for independent stores and software developers. So those are the two use cases that we're seeing right now. But the product's only been out 6-7 months. So we'll see some more over time.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, just the 66%, right there. That doesn't just speak to, well, I would argue that developers don't necessarily care about that. It's more like leadership that's got to foot the bill for that, right?
Yeah.
Or the leadership in the company. So that's a big number to lean on too for anyone looking to reduce costs, especially if they have that kind of problem. What's on the roadmap for ArcJet?
The first thing that we're going to do next year is building out different tech stacks. So we want to go to Python and Django, most popular framework. We want to go to Laravel and PHP, which is gaining in popularity and it's already very popular, but it's growing significantly. And also, like our own API is written in Go and our SDK is written in Rust. And so we want to support both of those languages as well. But our focus today has been basically picking the most popular framework in a language ecosystem, targeting that first, but then building out a generic SDK so that once we've got that first use case built, we can go to every other framework within the language. And so Django for Python, but there's others as well that we want to support. And so that's going to be a big part of what we're doing next year.
Awesome. That's cool. What's been what has or who has been like the biggest influence for you on this project or on this company?
It's the design side of things and really trying to hit the quality bar that developers are used to in the JavaScript ecosystem. Like I said, there's a new framework every week and there's loads of really cool tooling that people are releasing. When you look at what they're building, they really focus on the design, and that is the website design, the logo, the feel, the brand, but also the developer experience and how it works through the installation process, through the documentation, just making sure it's so much work to get all that right, but on the surface, it doesn't look like it, just get the docs right. But having them stay up to date and provide detailed code samples, all that, that's been our goal. And so the companies like Vercel and Netlify, they do an amazing job on both of those on the cloud platform side of things. And then there's infrastructure providers like PlanetScale for MySQL databases. Neon has an amazing experience if you want Postgres. ClickHouse for time series data. And these next generation databases or next generation database providers all have an amazing experience in signing up and using that product. And so I spend a lot of time just testing them, seeing how their flows work, understanding the little touches that they add into those flows to really add to the developer experience.
I like it. And I think you've already said it. It sounds like Apple's been a pretty big influence for you as far as, design and making it work well, which is always good to hear.
Right. And their idea of it just works, that's great for consumers. And then it just works. That's it. The real negative of Apple's it just works is, what happens when it doesn't work? Or like if you do need to configure things slightly differently and then you can't. Apple is great at doing kind of building products that look amazing and work amazing for 80% of people. And often that remaining 20% is the more technical people who want something more advanced or sophisticated. And so whilst we've tried to also copy that approach on trying to get the best experience for the 80%, we've also tried to pay attention to what happens when you want to break out of the quick start flow, what happens when you want to customize things or do a lot more sophisticated type rules or deal with the API in certain ways when you're not just following the quick start guides.
Gotcha. How should someone interested in ArcJet reach out or get engaged?
You can just go to arcjet.com. It's free. You can use it for free on personal projects. There's no billing on requests or anything like that. And then pricing starts at $25 a month per site. And so you can just try it out for free. You can run it on your computer. We've got some example apps, so you don't even have to deploy it to production. You can just test it locally.
That's awesome. Cool. Any closing thoughts?
I think if you're building something for developers, I think the amount of time you spend on the product should be equal to or less than the amount of time you're spending on the docs. The docs are the product. And so spending time actually writing about what you built and why, but then also explaining it in detail. We've spent a significant amount of time on that, across, not just me, but my entire team. And the more you put into that, it makes a difference. So documentation all the time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Are you using? And this is more of a general curiosity question. With AI, are you using AI to like document more?
We're using it for editing and to put the docs into ChatGPT and say what questions are not answered by this documentation that you can think of, and then that helps us on the iteration. So we're not using it for creating the docs, but for editing and finding things that we missed.
That's interesting, because I always feel like you could take it and be like, document this code, right? Or document this use case or whatever, right?
Yeah, you can. It's just it doesn't do an amazing job. Okay. So I think you could probably get it to give you bullet points that you can then expand on. But I find it most useful at the end of the process, and for it to be an editor and to suggest ideas and things for extra stuff that you missed.
That's cool. Yeah. I always figure and that's what people freak out about with developers, right? Is they're just going to start writing code and shoving it out, and it's like, no, you guys are like writing it and then looking to see, what you may have missed. So I like that.
Yeah, exactly. Or just like common problems that might come up, or you can ask it things like, what problems do you see with this, or anything that you would expect to be in this documentation that is missing, and it's pretty good at answering those questions.
That's awesome. Cool. All right, David. Well, thank you for joining me to discuss ArcJet.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on.